Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Peak. I'm the Managing Director and co-head of Workday Ventures. And Workday Ventures is the innovation capital arm for Workday. And we're here at Workday Rising 2019. We have 16 of the portfolio companies that we've invested in showing at Rising this year. And I'm really happy to introduce you to two of the executives from our portfolio companies. First, Lisa Skeet Tatum, who is the founder, president, CEO, and chief bottle washer of Landit.
Yes.
And Zoe Weintraub, who is the vice president of business development for Guild. And so welcome, both of you. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to start out by having you just spend a minute or two talking about your businesses. Lisa, could we start with you?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. Great to meet you, Zoe.
Yes, you too.
So Landit is the market leader in personalized career pathing. We are focused on increasing the success and engagement of women and diverse groups in the workplace. We take what would be typically reserved for the top of the pyramid, knit it together, and a one-size-fits-one at scale to unlock human potential. So our customers include Fortune 2000 companies, nonprofits, and over 37 countries.
Great. So I'll give a little background on Guild. Guild Education, we help large enterprises, Fortune 1000 and like size, administer and offer education benefits to their employees. So we think about it as how do you ensure that you're offering opportunities for all of your employees to go back to school, whether that's completing their high school degree or their bachelor's or graduate level. We manage all of the payments and the technology behind that, as well as layer on both a collection of coaching and support services to help administer the program to your employees, as well as a network of universities and learning providers where they can choose to go. Some of our clients include Workday clients as well, like Walmart, Discover Financial, Chipotle, and many others, but we're really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. And one of the topics that I wanted to hit today, I started my career at Workday 7 years ago, and one of the things that struck me about Workday was the number of women that we had in leadership positions, like true leadership positions that came from the authenticity and the skills that they had. A year and a half ago, I moved in with my partner, Leanne Levin-Saylor, to run Workday Ventures and to start a venture fund. And the first thing that we learned and heard is that this was a all-boys network, that it was men investing in men, and your companies are examples of exceptions to that. So I just wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the experience you had when you were raising capital, and if you found that to be in fact true. And I know you may have some data as to what truth is.
Yeah, so, and I certainly have an interesting perspective since I used to be a venture capitalist many moons ago. I would say the experience, there are other things like root canals and things that you would prefer to have over fundraising, but it's a necessary evil, and we know that women and people of color do have some challenges. Only about 2% of funding goes to women, 0.02 goes to women of color, and
It's just amazing.
It is
it's
amazing.
An amazingly
it is amazing.
pathetic number.
It is, and it's about how do you equitably invest in great ideas. And so it's certainly challenging. I think part of the problem is the industry itself is not very diverse. The rubric for evaluation is probably not as consistent as it should be. And what I tell people that I coach is you have to make sure you make the product, market, founder fit case. So it's not just product market fit, it's product market founder fit. But they should be doing diligence on the funds just like funds do diligence on them, because not everyone is a great partner. Similar to Guild, we're fortunate to have Workday as a partner. You have to pick your partners wisely, because when things go sideways, and they will, who's going to have more fight than flight? But it's challenging out there, and I see amazing entrepreneurs that are not getting the funding or the opportunity to bring amazing products and opportunities to market.
I think, I'd add on to that. So even though I'm not the founder or CEO of Guild, I think what Rachel Carlson, our CEO and founder, have done is really instilled the importance of who you bring to the table and making sure that that group is diverse. And we think about that on kind of three spectrums. One, our customer base. So are our partners, the Fortune 1000 companies, are they diverse? Are they thinking about these across the entire ecosystem? Two, we think about that from the universities that we work with. Are they providing access to low-income, first-generation, non-full-time first-time students, and how are they thinking about the fact that some of their students might not have ready access to internet or to a computer. And then the third is around our employee base, and I think that has been super key, and there's probably 4, so now I'm editing myself, but the third is our employee base, and 64% of our employees are women, and 75% of our employees report to a woman, and so we continue to think about how can we lead in that regard, but ensure that we're measuring diversity across the entire spectrum of our ecosystem, and then that fourth obviously comes back to the venture capitalists and who are our investment partners. What are they going to bring to the table that's different? What experience did they have within a Fortune 1000 organization, or helping lead, capital rounds of having, what I'll call like clean LPs, and how they're thinking about where their money's coming from and where they're bringing it back. So I think all of that has come to what our culture is really about when it comes to diversity.
I think what you said about customer base, I think both of our companies are focused on how do you democratize access and career success. And so we know that men and women, people of color, enter the workplace at the same percent, but they don't progress. And so as we look at it, that's not a capability issue, that's an access issue. And so the notion is, how do we enable companies to more evenly and intentionally invest in potential? Because right now the model is broken, right? You get a lot of investment at the beginning, then the big bolus in the middle, it's kind of hit or miss. And then if you make it to the top of the pyramid, which most of us will not, that's where the investment starts.
You guys will.
Well, she's already there. Already there.
But it is, how do you knit this together to give everyone a shot at success on their own terms, but in a way that you can measure? And so that's why companies come to us, which is helping them invest more intentionally in the success of everyone, which I don't know any company or organization that doesn't have that is a top priority. But they may not have the ability to do the one-size-fits-one at scale.
Yeah, I think one thing too on that piece is how we often, or recently, were quoted because it aligns with one of our recent investors, Stephen Curry, who you all might know, but
I know a little bit.
Is a little bit about him, but
he's a golfer. Right?
Yeah, really famous one.
Yeah.
Is that he and his wife and their foundation have really set out to say, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And I think that very much ties to both of our companies and how we think about working with partners that also see that as truth, and how do we deliver products, services, strategies that align with ensuring that we can more equally distribute opportunity.
That's right. And we find ourselves...
We're just having such a good time.
No, this is great. But what strikes me as an investor is that what excites me is that the markets you guys have are amazingly large, and not only large to start with, and growing. Because this has to be a business imperative for companies to succeed.
They're massive. If you think about, most companies focus on intake. And great companies will always attract great people. That's actually not the issue. The issue is what happens when they get there. Do they thrive? Are they promoted? Do they have a sense of belonging? And I think what you said is absolutely right, which is, yes, it's the right thing to do, but it is an economic and competitive imperative. And what gets measured gets done. So you have to show how you're moving the needle. We measure retention, mobility, net promoter scores. We're taking a very consumer approach to it, where in all of our companies, the average 70% of their members are distractors, right? 87% actively disengaged. But amazing things happen when you actually provide access.
Right.
You actually literally unlock human potential in a measurable way.
I think part of our model, for those that don't understand it, is that we help companies offer an education benefit, which has traditionally been tuition reimbursement, meaning an employee has to take out some money, whether it's their own, which most of the employees we serve don't have access to the capital that it would cost to go to college. So they take a short or a long-term loan out. And then they're reimbursed just like anyone's reimbursement expenses at the end of that term. And so our goal is that by working directly with the company and the institution, we remove that barrier altogether, so that we facilitate the payment between the company and the university. And as a student, you wouldn't have to pay anything. And I think what we've started to see is, one, it's increased the access for employees that otherwise weren't using the program pretty dramatically. So one company, a financial services company that doesn't have a ton of maybe frontline or hourly workers, they're seeing about 13% more of their women and minority employees taking advantage of the program because that barrier has been lifted. And I think, to your point, we have to be able to measure that impact and be able to see that, one, we're seeing usage increase, and then carry that through to we're seeing actually pay mobility, pay grade change is really kind of the key to thinking about how we make sure that more people can get to the top of that pyramid.
Absolutely.
Just, I'm going to go off script here a second.
Yeah, we've already done that,
because,
I think, a
you
bit.
guys- I know.
Zoe and I are
Well,
taking
you're
over.
smart
Yeah.
guys, right? And so, about a quarter, what we've been learning here at Workday Rising is about a quarter of people employed today aren't working for traditional companies. And so this is I'm thinking of this as a future business opportunities for you both. But how do you what are you hearing from your customers and your clients about today's workforce and why it's an imperative to offer them ways to be better, to advance, to possibly get a degree.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things. One, the old way of doing things, again, that one size fits all, that's gone. You have to meet people where they are. You also have to be portable because no one stays in the same job for long periods of time, and that's actually where you can have the career derailment. But this notion of, millennials, 6.2 jobs by the time they're 27. Most lasting less than a year.
I haven't had 6.2 jobs.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
It's still early. Mark.
I'm still
It's
early.
You got
days.
time.
That's right.
Yeah. So you have to make that investment earlier on, early and often. And I think the expectation now in this era of self-service careers is it's going to be about me, right? That's how you have the success. So I think companies are thinking there's no such thing as U.S. company, global company. We're all global, right? Because of the transparency. So they have to be more intentional and they have to invest earlier on in a more democratized way.
Yeah,
And it's scary.
I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. I think there's a few things that we see that align with that. I think the first is, as it relates to benefits, making them more available early in the process of onboarding. So most of our employers are offering an education program day 1, day 30, day 60, day 90, because they know they have to hang on to that employee, and if they hang on past that cliff, they're more likely to keep that employee long term. So that's one. And then I think the second is some stats we were actually talking about earlier, which I don't know if we shared with you, is millennials, 80% of millennials want to go to an employer that is more of a brand or a change maker, so that employer is committed to purpose and that they have some purpose in society and that they're externally communicating that. So I think that shift will continue to be part of how leaders make decisions about where they spend on benefits or investment in their talent pool. And then the last piece is that employees now are valuing benefits more than just pay increases. Because of what I would maybe argue to say that the corporation is taking on as it relates to the safety net, and where employees previously would go to local institutions or their governments about changes in services or their involvement in the community, they're actually looking to their employer to have more of an influence. And I think that over time will shift the overall sentiment of how they think about transforming their workforce.
Absolutely.
Your customers, by using your services, have a competitive advantage from my view.
Absolutely.
And you touched a little bit on how do you get adoption inside the businesses. What are you both seeing as best practices? Because you offer a service that is compelling. You've obviously have mind share with your customers, but then the first thing you must bump up against is how do I get the individual employees to take that first step to reach out with Guild and actually to use the service. What are you seeing as the best ways to do that?
So we actually don't see that friction point because everyone is motivated, they have skills, they have a track record, but what we hear is, I don't know where to start, I don't know what I don't know, and even if I did, I don't have the access. So when companies say, I am making an intentional investment in you, and here is the path and the access, who doesn't want success on their own terms? What they want also is safety, because no one walks around a company saying, I'm feeling less than confident today, or I'm feeling really vulnerable.
Or maybe if someone catches you on your way to the bathroom, they're like, uh-oh, something's going on. Lisa's not doing well.
That's right. So we suffer in silence. And so part of what we offer is not just the creation, the personalization, but it's safe. And so you can be vulnerable in a way that you need in order to get to the other side. So our retention, utilization, the signups is off the chart because we only have one goal, which is your individual success.
Yeah.
And companies are like, well, drop the mic, kind of game over.
Yeah.
So.
Ours is a bit different. I think there's kind of two ends of the spectrum. So we have some companies that have an education program today and they want to bring it, they want to modernize it. They want to remove the barriers of how much it costs to go to school up front. They want to bring around support services, which we have a coaching team, but they want it to stay steady state. We're not looking to increase or move our budget, but we want more people to know about it and we want them to engage. So maybe engagement is the goal there. And then there's other cases, and I'll I'll tout our good friends, Mickey Mouse, the Disney team. They
Gotta do
wanted
that.
they wanted to be the best, and they said in the first year we want to see the greatest amount of adoption that any other company has had as it relates to this type of benefit, because we so believe the intentionality that you mentioned. We so believe in our employees taking advantage of this and it driving better opportunities for them and for the business. And so they're at 9%, and the only comparable company in the first year was Starbucks, and I think 1.5 or 1.6% of their employees using a program. So pretty dramatic shift. And so I think our goal is that we can deploy the Disney playbook, or we can deploy the keep it as is but make it better. Keep the size as is but make it better and more accessible. And then let's measure business goals around that.
Great. We have just a few minutes left.
Yes.
And I wanted to circle back to this, to this whole concept that for some reason the access to capital for women and for people of color has been just very limited, and it's
Nicely said.
Yeah, well, it's a travesty. We just a small commercial for Workday Ventures. We don't intentionally invest in businesses that have women founders. We just invest in businesses that have great people, and we've been fortunate enough to 7 of the 16 companies that we have there happen to have female founders, and so we've just found it to be an opportunity for us.
Well, that's a different number than the 2% you started with, so that's
Yeah.
great.
O2 for women of color.
Yes, and so it's been, it's just been, for us, it's a little puzzling. So, I apologize that we're not going down that road. But what would you do to either give advice to somebody who's starting a business, who doesn't feel like they have access to capital, or if you, and maybe I can trade off a little bit on this, or if you were queen of the world, Lisa.
I am.
All right, and you are. Adjust your crown, please. How do you think we can make change? Because I think as we talk setting up this, we know that we're not going to solve this problem necessarily in our working lives, but we can make progress toward it.
Absolutely. So if I think on the VC side, it starts with diversity and who's actually writing the checks. So we need to get more diversity, more diverse voices around the table. Number 2, I would say they have to fish in broader ponds. So if you're only backing people then by definition, the opportunity is closed. Number 3, I mentioned before that consistent rubric, because I have seen both personally and with others, and I've been on that side, kind of what the standard is for non-diverse, and then what are the extra hurdles that we apply to others. So those would be some of those things. From a founder point of view, it is, again, going back to the diligence. So don't waste your time with people who are not going to give you a fast no or a fast yes, right? Because I'd rather someone tell me no and tell me why than waste my time. So do your homework, talk to the founders that they back so that you know who they truly are. Look at not just the firm, look at the partner. And quite frankly, maybe VC is not the first step. I mean, now you have amazing angel groups, you have other accelerator programs, there are other ways to get started.
In fact, you were Angels helped do your first financing.
Absolutely. And the last thing I would say is look for proxies of success. So who are you surrounding yourself with? Your advisors, your customers, strategics, other things that say this is worthy of the consideration. So I think there's things on both sides, but we got a long way to go, but I'm very encouraged by the new pockets and dedication that's popping up now.
I think Rachel, our CEO, would agree a lot with what Lisa said, and I think to pivot your question a bit is what can founders, minority and female and founders, think of to build the next generation of leaders who will go out and raise capital from venture capitalists. And I think for us, we think a lot about that from our employee, I'll call it our employee experience, which is how do we ensure that we have more diverse leaders managing teams? How do we think about benefits in a different way, or work-life integration? How do we think about the ways in which values seep into our client presentations and our onboarding? How do we build that playbook or that foundational view for a lot of our employees to say, that's what it could look like for me to go pick a company that cares about this ratio and the diverse group of thought and leaders and people. And then I think, some of those, I hope, some people that come out of Guild go on to start or run funds, and they can take that same lens and that value that it has in building a really strong business. So.
Lisa Skeet Tatum, Landit, Zoe Weintraub, Guild Education. If you are not a customer, check out their websites, learn more about them, or contact me, mark.peak@workday.com. Thank you very much.
Thank
Mark.
you. Thank you.
Zoe.
Thank you.
So what a great start to the conversation, thanks to Mark. I'm Brittany Skoda, Head of Investments for Workday Ventures. We're actually going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about people at the center of innovation. Here with me are Deb Wolf from BetterUp, Bob Toohey from Pymetrics, and CJ Mark from Vita Health. At Workday, we have always been a firm believer of putting people first, and this has had a huge impact on our success. The good news is that we're seeing more and more companies investing in their people, and at the same time, we're seeing more and more startups developing products and services that are enabling companies to elevate the people experience. So I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper here and start with how each of you are helping your customers put people first. So Deb, why don't we start with you?
So thank you, first of all. Thank you for having us as well. So I'm not sure how much everybody knows about BetterUp, so maybe I'll just do a little bit of an introduction of the company. So BetterUp pioneered professional coaching via a mobile platform in 2013. And the employee was always at the center of what we were doing. The person in the organization that was getting that coaching, and that's been true to who we are and what we've been doing from day one. We really do that through connecting those employees with a network of over 1,600 coaches worldwide. We coach in 60 countries and 32 languages. And we really want that one-to-one personal development for the employee. It has to be hyper-personalized. It's got to be relevant to what they're doing today. We know that by doing that and putting that employee in that position, they are a happier, more engaged, more productive employee, which benefits, of course, them, but also the business as well.
Great.
Great, thank you again for having us. From an employee standpoint and really putting the employee first, at Pymetrics, where we come into play and really help clients around the world is putting them first in two places. The recruiting process, which I think many people have gone through, it's broke. And it often doesn't think of the employee and where their potential is and how you pull them forward in that process, and then through a whole talent management life cycle. So what we really focus on is looking and helping employees and the client understand what their potential is. And we have technology and using neuroscience and behavioral gamified assessments, if you will, we take and look at the employees and look at their traits and look at them on a forward-looking basis and really what their potential is as they navigate around the world and look to see where they go, where they fit, what their best fit in work is, and where an employer might be able to move them around. And through the whole talent life cycle, we put experiences in to really kind of put the candidate that's at the center of this versus the company and really treat them like a consumer.
So, thank you as well. Pleasure to be here today. So, interesting, you talk about the recruiting process being broken. At Vita Health, we have really been founded on the same principle, which is putting people at the center, or putting patients at the center of healthcare. So, Vita is a virtual care company that really pairs people and provides digital therapeutics for folks that have chronic conditions. So if you think about employees in the workplace today, those chronic conditions don't go away when they enter the workplace during the day. So it's oftentimes very difficult for them to manage those things. So we literally, through mobile and web technology, provide people with access wherever they happen to be at any time, and pair them with a coach and a therapist, and help them to manage both those chronic physical and behavioral health conditions. So it's really helping both the employers and the employees in the workplace by putting that patient-centered approach out there in the healthcare ecosystem today. And as we all know, you're talking about recruiting being broken. Healthcare is very broken, right? So it's very very broken. So,
opportunity.
and right, a big opportunity. And again, in healthcare today, it's not a patient-centered world in the healthcare
Right.
system today. So that's why we're very, very passionate about putting people at the center of everything we do every day.
It's kind of the common theme you kind
Yeah,
of hear
exactly.
is that
Right.
the employee is the consumer of the future, and I think everyone's finally realizing, how do you treat them more like a consumer? Most things they do in the world are so simplified with technology, and I think kind of bringing that into a different place in the workforce makes a big difference.
Yeah, we would say the same thing about leadership development being broken at the core. I mean, it's not personalized, it's episodic. People go to a session, they maybe learn something while they're there, and they never actually take it into practice, and they forget it 3 months later when they actually need to bring those skills with them. And so, giving them that coaching aspect, similar to what you guys are doing on a regular basis, is what drives that behavior change and the actual the kinds of behavior that you want within the organization. New mindsets drive those behaviors drive business impact and outcomes.
And have you seen the philosophy around putting people first change?
I think what we're seeing today from an employee standpoint is a desire from the employee, and probably because they've brought so much of the consumer technology with them into their workplace, to really own their experience, right? They want to own that experience at work, similar to what they own in their own personal lives from a technology standpoint. And so when you start to think about what they're demanding in our world, what that looks like is they want professional development. They know that that's part of their employee experience. I mean, snacks, gym memberships, dry cleaning, those are table stakes today. So what they're really looking for is someone to invest in them. They want to know that they're putting the hours in. They want to know that that company's invested in their professional development as well.
And is the personalized health journey part of that as well, to the changing philosophy of how employers are viewing this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's really unique about what Vita is doing is literally serving things up or providing access to care in a very personalized way. So if you think about chronic conditions today, all those chronic conditions really are behavioral health conditions as well. So people may not be ready to engage with a health coach around nutrition in order for them to manage their diabetes or their hypertension, but they'll engage with a therapist for low-level depression or anxiety that helps them to get over the hump then, so that they can manage things more effectively. So when you talked about better outcomes, absolutely better outcomes because of that, and better ROI for our customers, who are the employers that are grappling with this kind of runaway cost. So if you look at the CDC data today, 60 to 75% of all the healthcare spend by employers in the U.S. marketplace is due to chronic conditions. So it's a huge part of their overall budget, and they're really grappling with better things to help them provide a better access point for their employees.
Yeah, I would echo if you just take the employee. What we look at is everyone should be a best fit to a role, and everyone should have a job. So when you look at that, how does that work today? And if you take the experience of whether you're recruiting or whether you're in a company, we partner with our clients to help them find their best fit, redirect people to where they may not think they can be a fit, help them kind of navigate what is complex today when they look at what job should I be going for? Am I going to be job X or job Y? So how do we partner with them? So similar to what you said, they take some of this in their own control, and we give them the tools and the insights to do that. But likewise, we partner with the companies to do the same thing. So the two have to come together to help navigate all of this and really make it a better experience. So very similar across the board.
What other innovations, Bob, have you been seeing around the people-centric philosophy?
I would say with everything, I think the biggest innovation people are very, very much so. I'm not sure it's innovation or just kind of starting to use different tools to communicate better with the employees, to kind of change that experience and kind of push things forward to them, whether it's healthcare, whether it's in employment or in finding your jobs and navigating that and learning about yourself. I think the technology is right in front of us, and we're finally exploiting that to kind of make it and serving that up to employees. And I think now making it simple and making that something that they can have that back to an experience. You can go online today and do a lot of different things, but when it comes to the employment marketplace, that's where technology is really changing to be that, the innovation is coming in front of that from an employee-centric standpoint. It's changing.
Do we think employees are feeling employee-centric at this point?
Oh, I think they're feeling very much in control, right? I mean, they're telling us what they want in their experience, and I think that's just, I mean, it's awesome for the company that can capture it because it's such a competitive advantage. I mean, if you can drive engagement at work, you know you're going to have these productive employees. I mean, research that we've done shows employees are looking for meaning within the work that they're doing. They want to understand the purpose of being connected to the company. We spend so much of our lives at work every day, right? Or we're connected, none of us have our mobile devices, which I'm sure we're all feeling a little crazy about.
Yeah,
They took
we're
it
a little
away.
shaky here because of that.
Exactly, but we're all connected all the time, and
Yeah.
so when you think about what and good companies know if they don't invest in that, those companies are those employees are gonna leave, and so I do think that we're seeing a very employee focused and employee centric market today. I mean, obviously the war on talent is driving that, but
Right.
just to add on the innovation question that you were asking earlier, we think about that human as the connection for the employee. That's what we're all about, and we always have that human at the center. And part of where we're using innovation, I'll just echo Anil's keynote from this morning around machine learning. We are using machine learning to drive connections between that perfect coach and that employee. So your coach can be anywhere, right? The right person for our employees to work with might not be within the zip code that they're in. And so connecting, using technology like that, using machine learning to drive our content engine, right? And being able to give them the right exercises at the right time, the right kinds of content at the right time. We always think about that human touch being the most important thing for the employee, but the innovation behind it, that machine learning behind it, is really what's driving that technology.
Yeah, I would add on you hear today machine learning, AI, and the world is like, why are we using that? Especially when you start applying it to the human world, it's okay. I mean, that's what we have to get comfortable with because it's improving things.
Right.
And I think when you talk about it around machines and things like that, everybody's fine. But when you start applying it to humans, everybody starts to get nervous. And I think that's where the innovation is really coming into play. Most employees and people want immediacy now with all our devices. So
Right.
similar to your example, we could serve up jobs that you might be applying for in other fits because of those tools, because of the AI, because of the machine learning and what you're doing. That innovation allows that immediacy and gives them feedback that they can act on. So it's changing and improving both the employee and I would say the company's outcomes on both sides. So I think it's really a positive, but I think we have to demystify it, if you will.
Super interesting. Do you think that ultimately helps change the arc or changes the arc of some employees' journeys? Or is there, what ends up being the impact there?
I would definitely, what we see is oftentimes, whether you're out of college and applying to a role or moving into a company and around a company, what we'll see often is sometimes folks would apply to a job and in our tools and what we give them, they may have not been a candidate for that job. In the past, they would just drop to the floor. We could redirect them to a different path. They may have thought they were going to be an expert in finance and be a financial analyst, but we found out you're a really good fit for a marketing journey, and they're on a journey they never expected, especially early in your career. Those are things that you want to help serve up so they kind of have insights. They don't know what a lot of these jobs are today. Yeah, and even if you're in the middle of your career or later in your career moving around a company, the same thing. You may think this is my path. How do we help you kind of open up that lens and aperture to say, I have other opportunities, and likewise, as I said, and then partner with the client so then they can provide other tools for those employees and help them kind of have a better engagement. Back to your point of the engaged employee inside the workforce is better for your brand, better for you and your outcomes in the company. So, yes.
So it's interesting. I love hearing about how both of you are applying machine learning. You're absolutely right. So when you think about healthcare and machine learning, that really scares people.
Yes.
But to your point, the ability to use that machine learning on the front end to match people or pair them with a pathway that is attuned to them and personalized for them makes it that much more user-friendly for the patient or the employee, if you think about it. So oftentimes people are just floating around in the healthcare system. They don't really know where to go to get the resources they need, etc. By using machine learning to pair people up with the resources that are available to them. In our case, it's coaches. A coach that has a better personality fit for somebody. They feel more comfortable then, they're more willing to engage. So it's taking that high touch, the human component of that, marrying that then with machine learning to get the best of all worlds. That's really powerful.
Right. And just get people comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I think we're all, every time you open up the paper, the new article is, oh, this is the AI or machine learning. But all of these examples make it better for people.
Yeah, there's a benefit to the employee to embracing these new technologies and getting to next levels in every case.
It's the same technology they use in everything else in their lives. You know,
Yeah.
all the other things they're doing in their lives, they're using that same technology.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
why not
what's-
apply it to help them?
Exactly. What CJ and I were both describing around content or exercises coming to employees is very Netflix-like. If you think about it, that's exactly the experience they've had in their consumer world, and we're just
Yep.
bringing them right into the into the enterprise.
So do you think that speeds the level of adoption then in the enterprise? Because we all know how to use these things, or is there still a little bit of, well, I use this at home personally, should I be using this at work?
I mean, I think the beauty of what we're doing is completely invisible to that employee, right? And that's how you want to apply technology. It's not that they have no idea what's going
Right.
on behind the scenes. I mean, our members take an assessment. Behind the scenes, we're looking at 150 different factors to match them to that perfect coach. They have no idea. That happens
Right.
in a nanosecond. They don't know, right?
Well, in 150 factors in a nanosecond, which
Right.
a
Right.
human wouldn't be
Exactly,
able to do.
Right.
exactly. And that's what they're expecting, right? They want that experience. They want to get to the development part. They don't want to be hampered by the technology. So I think that's where you have to look, and I think that's what Workday is doing as well, is how do we, in these in these employee journeys, how do we start to actually, serve up things at moments that matter for both the employee and the company, and so that we can develop our people further, so that we can, take the next step. And that's behind the scenes. It's completely invisible to them.
It's a great way to put it. Behind the scenes is where all the magic happens. The employee gets something different. The
That's right.
clients, the companies have to embrace it. That's where their work may be changing, but the outcomes should be far better. So I think we have change management on the user side, delivering that back to the employees.
I think about by putting the person at the center of everything, it's kind of a duck on a pond, right? So it seems really simple to the person, right? Because we put them at the center and we're trying to remove all the barriers, take the friction away for them. But underneath the water, the feet are going 100 miles an hour. So we're doing all of this work behind the scenes with machine learning, all the logic that's being built into the program. But for the member and that end user, it's simplifying everything for them.
Feels like we all agree that the people first philosophy is here, and there's technology to really enable this. Where do you think this goes in 5 years?
5 years, I think it's going to be hard for us to even predict, because if you look back 5 years ago today, but I would say speed and innovation around us is going to move at a faster pace, which we all read about, and I think we have to embrace it and help employees, companies all go through that journey. But I would say embrace the change and help people through that, because it's only going to kind of enhance everybody's experiences in the long run. So I think only positives are going to come of it, and I think we got to kind of let those things go and move forward and start embracing the technology and not feel fear of it.
I mean, I'm excited about what's happening in the field of HR today and what's happening for employees. I mean, for us, you look 2, 3, 5 years ago, and there was so much focus on STEM careers, and there still is. And obviously, we need people like that. But in what we're doing and what we're helping our employees do is really focus on those leadership skills that they never flex on a regular muscle on a regular basis, right? So it's things like innovation, creativity, imagination, like all these things that people call soft skills that CEOs are like, my people can code, but they actually can't communicate or collaborate. And so how do I, so for us, I think we see employees craving that kind of development at work. I think that's a really exciting time for all of us, regardless of what part we're in, because it really is about the employee, what their personal journey is and what they want to develop.
Those soft skills will drive that fit and success for
totally.
the companies and moving that along. So that's really the outcome for everybody. And I think the overall employment marketplace will change drastically as we look ahead in 5 years. It's going to be very open. Inside companies, it's that way. Outside, and everyone has to kind of go to their highest potential, and that's going to allow them.
So as the healthcare guy on the panel, I'm
Lady?
We're going to be healthier. That's what we want.
well, yeah, I mean, it's really, when I look at where we were 5 years ago with virtual care and where we are today, and the ability to actually manage chronic conditions, which are highly complex and a huge driver of overall healthcare spend in the U.S. and globally worldwide, as the technology increases, this ability with a mobile device and biometric, and be able to, the ability to now take in biometric data remotely. I mean, our ability to treat patients is just going to expand exponentially using remote devices, et cetera. So I'm incredibly excited, and I mean, even when I look at 12 months and 24 months, that horizon, and how quickly things are changing because of the technology platform, and as the adoption of mobile has become, it's, 97% of all Americans have a smartphone. I mean, it was 77% when you looked at the stats, 2 years ago. So it's just, the sky's the limit. I'm incredibly excited.
Healthier world, and everyone will have a job.
Exactly.
Well, on that
There you go.
note, I'm totally energized by this conversation. I'm really excited about this, and thank you all for sitting and chatting for a few minutes.
Great.
Well,
Thank you for having
so
us.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Brittany.
Hi there. Good to see you.
Good to see
Thanks
you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
We had a ton of great insights in the last segment, so would love to keep it going. And
All right.
This is the last segment of our innovation chat for Workday Ventures today. And this segment, we're going to focus on the tech-human connection. And I've asked two of our portfolio companies to join us, Brett and Eyal from Data.World and Maya Systems, respectively. One of the things, we're all seeing that artificial intelligence and machine learning are a huge, huge focus. And companies are investing heavily in the technology side of this. And as we heard in our last panel, they're also investing really in the people side of it as well. And to me, this people-tech duo seems like an incredibly dynamic conversation. I'd love to chat with you both about this, and maybe start by asking you both how you're seeing the human-tech connection play out in your companies and with your customer. And maybe we start with you.
Sure. So we see that people and recruiters are always going to be at the center of the process. But the two main constraints that we see around people and humans is that they don't have a lot of bandwidth. So you can only have so many conversations or perform so many tasks every day. And they have lack of visibility into all the different jobs or opportunities or the data and the ability to analyze that information at a large scale. So what that does is it really limits their ability to have all those conversations and to connect candidates to the right opportunities. They're very siloed in their 40 recs that they manage every day. And so the way we see people being augmented is the ability to really scale communication and engagement with conversational AI, where you can manage large talent pools, you can stay in touch with them, nurture and engage them over time, and really refresh that information and source from that pool, as well as engage everybody who's coming to you to have those conversations, to learn and to connect them to the right opportunities. So we're seeing a number of different ways where conversational technology can augment people in the process.
One in a very positive way.
Exactly.
One of the things we sometimes see is the negative connotations of technology, but you're helping really connect people to opportunity.
Absolutely, and create a better experience. So you can actually have a dialogue and engage with every single candidate who applied to a job. In the world where you don't have technology, that's really hard, because you can't, if you're L'Oreal, you can't have 2 million conversations with 2 million applicants. So we're looking at ways to really scale that ability to communicate.
Excellent.
So.
Beth, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, so we're pioneering a new category of software at Data.World. It's called Enterprise Data Catalogs. And it's really about unleashing the power of data inside organizations. And we're obsessive users of our own product, as you would imagine. And we use it for literally all of the data pipelining in the company flows into Data.World. All the A/B split tests that we do flow in. We can get to statistical significance pretty quickly on any new functionality that we roll out, and then really see the visibility in that across the company. All of the analysis that we do flows into Data.World. And we're seeing that around with the companies that we work for as well. A lot of Fortune 500 type of companies that, you were talking about being siloed. And one of the things that we see inside of these large companies is data is one of the most siloed things, which is kind of ironic because we're living here in the networked age, but data is one of the most underutilized resources inside of these companies. And we're this great unifying platform to bring people together organized around the data so they can do their job more effectively. That's unleashing all levels of productivity.
What kind of improvements do you think we're going to see from continued leveraging of human tech elements?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One is productivity for recruiting teams. So all of a sudden you're automating a lot of the repetitive legwork, and so you're giving that time back so that you can focus more on the relationship building and some of the more meaningful interactions and really prioritize how that time's being spent. Also in terms of speed, right? All of a sudden you can talk to people instantaneously right when they submit an application. Or in a more timely fashion, when a job opens up, you can now reach out to 600 people all at once. So there's this speed element of really being able to drive people through the funnel. And then I would say the third big piece that we're really excited about is the candidate experience. So you're going from this world where you apply, you hear back 85% of the time, or you don't hear back 85% of the time, and you're applying to 40 jobs in hopes of hearing back from one recruiter, this kind of spray and pray mentality, to a world where you apply to a job, you may not be a fit, but it's not binary, right? You may be connected to another opportunity, but 100% of the time you're getting that feedback, and then you're also having this high touch experience throughout your entire journey as a candidate and an employee. So, those are some of the ways that we're excited to see the impact for our customers.
You've seen a ton of improvements. Are there many improvements that you're seeing once you unlock or unleash the data within an enterprise?
Well, one of the things that I'm most proud of recently, I was visiting the Associated Press. They've been one of our longest time customers. And their Senior Vice President of Strategy, Jim Kennedy, said, "I've got exciting news to tell you," while I was in New York. And that's that the team that selected Data.World, which really pioneered this new class of data sets for the news, things like on the opioid crisis and African American home ownership in the US, and the fact that home inventory is near a 40-year low in the US, and a bunch of other really important data trends. That team just won the Chairman's Award, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in news. And it's such a prestigious award that it's only given out annually, and most years it's not given out. And the reason it was given out is because of the impact that it's had on data journalism. And the way the Associated Press uses Data.World is not just to catalog their internal data that's newsworthy, but then distribute that to their customers, like the Washington Post and New York Times, via our platform, and then collaborate with them to write these data-driven stories. And so that was really unexpected for them to win that type of award, but I think it's safe to say that their interaction in using our platform with all these different news agencies, it's had a real impact on things like the opioid crisis in the US. I mean, part of the big lawsuits that just went down, that was a direct result of people getting very informed about how big of an issue this was at a state level, at a county level, different zip codes, and being able to compare that to the overall nation, neighboring states, etc.
Yes, super interesting in the impact that you have as a data-driven organization. The human tech connection, they're often linked, and oftentimes people want to pull them apart. Do you feel like there's more work to be done to get humans to want to embrace innovation, or are we already there?
It's a great question. I mean, for recruiters, I think the biggest thing that we focus on is how do we really make their lives easier and better. So if you really focus on it from a user experience perspective, for example, we automate the interview scheduling process, and a lot of the magic that we do happens behind the scenes. But once we get the candidate on the calendar and make sure that calendar is fulfilled, then we now introduce the concept of one-click actions for the recruiter directly within the calendar, so that they don't have to leave their existing system. They just click a button, whether it's, I need to reschedule or submit offer or disposition directly from that calendar, makes it really easy. And then they click it, and all of a sudden Maya's automating that engagement. It's a delightful moment from a recruiter perspective. So the more we can kind of implement it and integrate it into their existing workflow and build it for their benefit, I think that's where you start to get better adoption and more people saying, I love Maya, I want Maya, right? Which is what you need to get customers to expand. So yeah, I think integration and how we're implementing it seamlessly within the workflow is probably the biggest piece. And then for the candidates, one of the things we weren't sure about was, would people even respond or engage with a bot? And that was one of the biggest questions in going in. And now we're seeing 93% of people complete conversations, and we get feedback every time. Within every conversation, we ask for feedback, and it's really positive. And so I think, if you focus on the end user in either respect, you're going to get the best results.
That's cool.
Have you been seeing that as it relates to the data teams and data officers within companies?
So just in terms of the overall improvement?
Yeah.
Well, it's a really exciting time in our space. I've been fortunate enough to help pioneer 2 software categories before this, and when you pioneer a new category, there's new job roles that come into play. And so one of the new job roles that's becoming pretty popular is that of a data scientist. And anytime I lecture at a university, I always say, if you're interested in analytics and programming, you'll actually probably do better as a data scientist now than computer scientist, because we have a huge skills gap. I'm sure you're seeing that in your company in terms of what people are looking for. Another new role that's come around is that of a chief data officer, which if you read books like Winning with Data, just even 4 years ago when that book came out, that role wasn't even mentioned in the book. And now around 80% of Fortune 500 companies are predicted to have a chief data officer in the next few years, which is kind of astonishing to think about it. And so we're seeing this new class of data workers come around. Data storytelling is becoming very important. And what they're missing the most is really access to the data inside the company, because data is something that's been very fragmented across lots of different platforms, lots of different technical platforms. There are software as a service platforms, also on-prem data on their, literally on their physical machines, like in spreadsheets. And there hasn't been a great unifying platform to bring that together, and that's part of the reason why we've been pioneering this enterprise data catalog company and solution. And so it's a really exciting time. Everybody says data is the new oil, but the reality is it's mostly buried inside companies. It's mostly in a crude format that can't really be used. And that's really sad when we live in this networked age and we're supposed to be in this age of AI and ML. But if the foundation of data is broken, then you're really not going to get to that future.
It's interesting, as you were both talking, I heard this common theme of we're democratizing access.
Yes.
Access in many ways to a broader talent pool and being able to engage and access to data to drive better insights and engagement.
Yeah.
Where do you think this goes? What's the opportunity from here?
Oh man. Well, we're excited to really take more of an ecosystem approach, in that now all of a sudden you have all of the jobs in our client's pool implemented into our platform, and we have a clear visibility into the health of each funnel. We have access to the enriched candidate data in terms of pools that they have access to, as well as the recruiter's capacity, how much availability they have on the calendar, how many roles are they trying to fill. And so what we're trying to do is really create this kind of living and breathing ecosystem where you can kind of pull all these data sets together, and thanks to what you guys are doing, obviously that data gets better and better, so that candidate A is always being connected instantaneously to the right opportunity. And when a job opens up, we can reach out and engage with the candidates instantaneously, right, in real time, to drive them into the funnel. And we always know where the gaps are. So if we need to mobilize talent, we can help upskill that talent into that void in that ecosystem. So bringing everything together with the engagement methodology that we're bringing with Maya to build that more efficient marketplace. And that's the future as I see it. So.
So a huge aspect of any technological innovation is really focusing on efficiency improvement, productivity gains. And where we see this going is really helping companies build to a completely data-driven future, which may sound scary to some people, but it's actually really empowering and exciting, because the reality is that if you have the answers that you need to actually do your job effectively, versus the mystique of like how the company is performing in different areas, then it makes you far more efficient, it makes you far more effective at your job. And I've seen this literally since I was 26 years old. So I started a company called Core Metrics back then, which became one of the world leaders in web analytics. And I remember companies like Eddie Bauer debating for 4 hours every Monday what goes on the hero image on their homepage, because they were thinking like a cataloger. And we showed them through Core Metrics, only 5% of people ever click on that, and less than 2% of them buy. And so it changed the way that they stopped having that 4-hour meeting every Monday morning, for example. And we saw similar things at Bazaar Voice with customer ratings and reviews in terms of how people partnered with their suppliers. And now at Data.World, I get to do this with the best startup team I've been a part of, and we get to have an impact across the company in terms of all of their data. And that's really exciting. I feel like I've been on this journey towards helping companies create a data-driven culture since I was 26. But now we can do it at a much grander scale and literally impact the entire company and their customers and partners as well.
Well, I'm so glad that we all had the opportunity to catch up here. I'm energized by this conversation, and it seems like there's a huge opportunity in front of us to really leverage the human-tech connection as we all go about our daily lives. And so thank you so much. And for all of you that are watching, please hang on with us. We have our Chief Diversity Officer up next, Karen Taylor, and we'll let her take it from here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Taylor, and I am Chief Diversity Officer at Workday. And I am thrilled to be here with Pam Jeffords of PwC at Workday Rising.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Welcome, welcome. It's a great environment so far, super vibrant, lots going on. So let's jump into this. So we're going to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion, and I really want to talk about the things that matter, because there are a lot of things going on in society and in our workplaces that are hard for us to deal with. And so I really want to get into some deep topics. So
love it. Let's go.
Let's get to it. So look, companies are calling it DEI, DIB. We call it VIBE, value, inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. How do you guys define diversity and inclusion at PwC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us and for our clients, it's really about making sure your employees understand what you're saying. So whatever feels right. So we talk about every organization has their own culture. Every organization has the way they say things. So for us, it's just most important that when you say diversity, that your employees understand what does that mean. It typically means, workplace diversity tends to mean representation, representation of perhaps historically underrepresented groups, sometimes women, sexual orientation, gender identification, veteran status. And then the word inclusion is being broken off to mean inclusive of every identity. So when you talk about dimensions of identity, there are so many dimensions of identity. And so how do you have inclusion of all of those dimensions of identity? But reserve that word diversity to mean, what are we trying to accomplish from a historically underrepresented standpoint? And then, of course, to your point, we're starting to understand more about belonging, a sense of belonging. We're starting to talk about purpose. And the more your employees know what you mean when you say those words, the stronger connection everybody has.
Yeah, I agree 100%. For us, that belonging piece is really critical, because belonging is about how do I feel personally, right? Inclusion is about what's the environment look like? Is that environment inclusive in a way in which I feel like I can thrive, right? But belonging is about how am I feeling? So I'm glad that you actually defined it that way. So let's talk a little bit about how diversity has actually evolved over time, right? So if I think about back to the 60s and the 70s, and it was about affirmative action, and it was about EEO, and then it evolved to diversity and inclusion, and now, to your point, we're talking about belonging. How has this topic evolved, maybe even just over the last few years at PwC, and what are some of the more specific things that you guys are really focused on?
Yeah, well, one thing it's evolved for sure from a compliance standpoint to the right thing to do, to the business imperative. It continues to evolve. But one of the things I think the biggest change has been this notion that diversity is about, at some point, you and I figure out how much alike we are. And it's evolved to actually know it's about understanding and appreciating how different we are. And I think a CEO once said to me, Pam, you're the first person who told me it's okay to acknowledge that you're a woman. That I thought my role in diversity and inclusion was to somehow forget you're a woman, forget that you're different than me. And so this permission to say we are different, value those differences, and then I think importantly understand it is hard, right? And we're seeing this conversation around diversity and inclusion being this simple thing, like just go have lunch with someone who's different than you, to it's really about those hard conversations and understanding how different we are. So I think it's evolved appropriately in the last 10 years, and it continues to evolve every day into, it really is nuanced, and it is sometimes difficult, and appreciating that.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. When I think about the difference, I think about difference in the beauty of diversity, right? And how we all come with different experiences. We come from different backgrounds. We're different genders. We're different sexual orientations, and those things really matter when it comes to my self-identification. But how do we think about, it's a hard conversation to have sometimes, and there's a lot of sensitivity embedded in this conversation around diversity. How do companies just kind of unpack it so that they really are creating that safe space for employees to have that dialogue, especially when it's dialogue around difference?
And it's hard, right? And so one of the things that companies, again, you talk about the evolution in the last 10 years. I remember I started working in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was almost a promise that come to work and you'll be free from any conversation outside. Like, we're almost going to protect you, so let the bad stuff happen outside, and then you get to come in and you don't you don't have to talk about race, or you don't have to talk about politics or any other conversation. You're going to be this safe space. But the reality is, you can't leave that at the door, and so employees want to come in and they want to talk about it, and more importantly, diversity of their workplace is actually sometimes the most diversity some people are going to get, because when they're home, it's a little more homogeneous. So now organizations are having to pivot to say, I was keeping it out, but now they want me to bring it in. So now it's the tactical part of how do we create a space for people to have those courageous, civil, critical conversations in a very respectful way. And that we're seeing a lot of organizations create programs. We've seen organizations have courageous conversation programs using apps sometimes to create those conversations. In the case of PwC, we actually have color brave conversations that are structured. We encourage our partners to have and host conversations, and it was definitely a little on the bumpy side at the beginning. Yeah. But the commitment from our CEO was this will happen, and everybody followed along, and now it's pretty common.
So were there things in your environment that you had to change to create that space where people would actually lean into having these conversations? Because most times we actually are not comfortable talking about the differences, and so the environment sometimes can be such that I just don't feel safe. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing or saying it in the wrong way. How did you, do you have any advice for how people can think about how they create that place where employees can lean in and have these conversations, especially when there's fear that comes along with it?
Yeah, that's great, because I do think grace is something that I've had to learn, and we've all had to learn, because it is, sometimes people are going to say things that aren't necessarily correct. And initially it was about calling it out, and now it's about having the grace to allow people to be wrong. And I would say the biggest thing of learning, if somebody asks me what's the one thing that you need to teach people, it's how to own your impact as opposed to holding on to your intent. So as a person myself who says wrong things almost every day, as I'm really provoking new conversations, so I'm always in a space where I'm not the smartest person around this topic. So I used to hold on so much to my intent. Here's what I meant, here's what I intended. And I would spend 10 minutes telling you my intent as opposed to owning my impact. And then maybe explaining my intent when the time is right, but own your impact first. Then your intent will be well known at some point. But that's the biggest flip for most people, is quickly own the impact as opposed to explaining your intent. That was tough.
I think along with that, it's super important that we have empathy in the conversation, empathy to know that people are going to fail, empathy to know that people are going to try, and empathy to know that when I do fail, other people are going to be like, it's okay. It's okay for you to ask me these questions. I used to get a lot of folks asking me, do I call you Black or African American, right? And they would wait for years to ask me that question. I was like, just ask. I don't care the way that you ask. And by the way, I'm really happy to tell you what my perspective is on it, right? My one single perspective. But that having the courage to really ask those difficult questions, I think is super important.
I have a question for you. How well do I need to know you before I ask you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's got to be trust that's built, right? I mean, you probably could, but I wouldn't recommend that you just go up to any person that you don't know and ask them the question. But I think when there's a little bit of trust and when there's understanding that we're in this together, almost all questions, people want to teach you how to do this better. And so I think all questions are really on the table and open for discussion when you have that trust in a relationship where people are open and you kind of have shared values around wanting to do great work in this space.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. So look, I mean, we talked about this a little bit prior to the conversation, and there's lots going on, I think socially that we need to address as a society. So whether or not it's the Me Too, it's a hashtag Me Too movement, or it's Black Lives Matter, or, it's all these, or it's the political season that we're about to embark on next year. These conversations are going to be extremely tough for us to have next year. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I think understanding when's the right time to have them, and your audience, because they are emotional, right? A lot of these conversations are about our personal feelings, right? And so some people like to always have them over some type of a food, you know, to say, all right, we're going to sit down, acknowledge that we're going to have the conversation. And again, create that space. I think initially organizations and people need to be a little bit more structured in that. And then as the relationships develop and as that becomes more comfortable, I always say you're working a muscle, right? Without a doubt, we're all working our muscle when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And so when you feel more comfortable working that muscle with others in the room, then you can start to make it more casual and off the cuff. But initially, these are very sensitive. And so I like guided facilitation around some of these. Again, especially even for those of us that talk about this all the time, we're going to, again, say things that are wrong. We're learning. And that's why one of the reasons I never refer to myself as a diversity and inclusion expert, because I don't know that any of us are ever experts, certainly not on each other. And so while I might be an expert on white women in leadership positions, I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to other dimensions of identity. So I tend to call myself a steward of diversity and inclusion. And I think if we just go into it saying nobody's expecting us to be an expert, nobody's expecting us to be right all the time, having that grace, owning your impact, those are some ground rules I like. So I do encourage facilitation when you're starting out, and then it becomes a little bit easier.
I want to talk about two things that we continue to just kind of brush to the side. One is I do want to go back to politics just a little bit. Like I said, we're about to embark on this political season next year, and we know that we're going to have polar differences in our views around politics. We also know that, after Election Day, we've got to come back into the workplace, and we have to have that respect for one another, and we still have to work together, and we still have to think about what we're there to do for that company. How are we going to make this happen?
Yeah, I think it is acknowledging that, to your point, that people are going to come back and it's going to be a tough day for some people and not for others. And I think it's that respect and that civility that says we can have differing opinions. And if you are really emotionally charged about it, then understand and take a step back, right? Because it is knowing yourself and knowing if you're in a good place to have those conversations, and knowing they're going to come. And I do think it's interesting. I think 2020, from a political standpoint, we have, we talked about this earlier, we have the 100-year anniversary of women's right to vote. And we talked about the fact that it was really white women's right to vote. And looking at it from an intersectional standpoint, a lot of women and other people of color did not have the right to vote 100 years ago.
That's right.
And respecting that. But I do think it's a good reminder that of privilege. It's a great reminder of rights. And I do think a lot of politics is about our right to vote, our right to express our belief, and to have a belief. But it is going to be challenging, and I think a lot of companies are are starting to say now, let me get that platform in place so that maybe on a different topic around inclusion, and then get ourselves ready for that political season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, because I think that I don't think that we can ignore the fact that this turbulent time is going to come, and it's going to come really quickly. And I think the more we plan for it now, the more we start to have that practice around how do we have respectful conversations, how do we deal with some of the more difficult topics leading up into this one that we know is going to be super hard, I think is probably a good approach for people to start to think about. You mentioned intersectionality. How important is that in the workplace today? I mean, I certainly have an opinion on this, being an African American, female, lesbian, executive in tech. How do we think about intersectionality? Because all people are not created equal in the workplace. I may not have the same experiences that you have just because you're a woman. Right. So how does intersectionality play in the importance of the diversity conversation today?
It's of course huge. And now we're sitting here at Workday Rising, so it's important, and not just a plug, but it's important to say that 5 years ago we did not have the ability to look from an intersectional perspective at the data and the experiences of our employees. It wasn't that it was easier, it just wasn't possible. There is no excuse anymore for companies not to be looking at things from an intersectional lens. The data's there, And we know, in our gut, we've always known the experience of different groups is different, but now we have the data that tells us it is different, and we can see it in performance reviews and opportunities for staffing and high potential opportunities and exit rates. So if an organization isn't looking at all their data and cutting it a variety of different ways to see what the data is telling them, they're really missing that opportunity to understand what are the behaviors and what are the experiences of different groups. So I'm a big believer in changing our mindset from what we don't know can't hurt us. That is not the case anymore, right? It's what you don't know can hurt you. And organizations, it's something like 25% of organizations are still not cutting their data by gender, much less any other dimension. And the data's there. We've got to start looking at it. It's telling us something.
I agree, and I think in addition to that, listening to employee sentiment sliced by that intersectionality is super critical. It's not just important just to look at the demographic pieces. Right. It's like, what's the sentiment of your employees? What are the experiences they are having? How are those experiences differing based on those demographics? And then how do you target specific actions to really address how you make sure that sentiment of belonging or inclusion or whatever you call it is even across the company, because that certainly isn't happening today. And I think you hit on certainly the right point. The first point is look at the data, share it with your executives, figure out how to get that employee sentiment so that you really know what's going on. I want to talk about another another little touchy conversation, and that's race. So, the history of race in this country has gotten us to a place where we still have very different, not just views, but we're treated differently. It's also one of those topics that's so extremely difficult to talk about, certainly in the workplace. And I know a lot of companies and a lot of people are just shying away from the conversation. This to me is a conversation where we have to lean in almost more than any other conversation, because it started back really in the days of slavery, right? And there are still disparities that are happening today based on that history. I want to talk about how do we have this conversation in the workplace. It is painful. It's hard for people to talk about on both sides. Not everyone wants to talk about it, but I think it's kind of the pinning issue of a lot of the issues that we can't seem to get past. How do we deal with race in the workplace?
It's a tough topic because no one wants to believe there's racism, even though we see it, we hear about it, the data tells us when we're faced with it, when it actually happened, you're like, well, that's not what they meant, right? We just want to discount it. But
that couldn't have happened to
you.
You.
Like,
no,
it's not because you're black, and you're like, well, yes,
yes.
actually it is. So we're good people. We don't want to believe it's true, even though illogical people, we know it's happening.
Yeah.
So when it happens in our organization, when it happens to people we know, when we do it ourselves and make assumptions, it's really tough. So one of the ways you can start, the other day, one of my colleagues, she started an introduction. We were doing a kickoff meeting for a client, and there was probably 15 of us in the room, and she had us all talk about our names. All she did is say, where did your name come from? Tell us about your name. And so I was sitting there, and I was ready for my name, right? And all of a sudden, there was some black individuals in the room, and they started talking about how their family had made up their last name because it did have a root in slavery, or they immigrated over and didn't have a last name, and all these variations of really not knowing what their last name was. And here I am talking, I'm ready. Yeah. And all of a sudden you just sit there, and again, that privilege sinks in, that not only do I know 5-6 generations of where they came from, right? I started to fiddle with my ring and realize, I can tell you this ring came from the 1850s. I can tell you where it came from, who had it. So I can actually tell you the great aunt, grandmother that had this ring before me, and the mine that it was cut from. Yeah. And you sit there going, what a privilege that I know my name, I know my ancestors, I know where a ring came from. And here are individuals talking about, well, here's where our family name was based on the plantation they were at. And that's when those stories are the only thing that's going to allow us to have empathy and really talk about it and what's happening, and realize that when we talk about privilege, it's simple things like knowing your name that we never think about as white growing up in the United States. So starting off talking about something like allowing people to share what they want, and then getting into when the time is appropriate. At PwC, we have something called Color Brave, and it was started to have racial conversations within the workplace. It was amplified when we lost an employee who was murdered in Dallas last year, and that trial was very much in the press, and that was a PwC colleague. That, without a doubt, amplified our commitment, and one of the goals that we all have is how do we amplify this and how do we get others as outraged without having to have a catastrophic event? Because that, at the end of the day, we don't want every CEO going through what our CEO went through, or every business leader having to have these experiences to have the empathy.
That's right.
And that's probably the biggest challenge, is how do you have empathy without experience?
Yeah.
Because we need to fast forward this a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think one of the things that as we step into having more and more of these conversations, it's important to acknowledge up front that it's going to be painful.
Yes.
It's going to be painful. There perhaps are going to be tears. You know, there's shame associated with this, and I think people just have to acknowledge that that's part of the journey that you have to go on to really start to heal from a lot of the history that's happened.
And surround yourself with people who push you, because my sister and I push each other a lot. And so we were talking the other day of how do we own our privilege, right? And so had been watching the Chelsea Handler special, saying, all right, how do we unpack this? What do we do? And you know, we really talk very candidly, like, as white women who grew up 5 generations in Louisiana, what's our responsibility, and how do we hold ourselves accountable? And we push each other to realize we have to hold ourselves accountable, that we helped kind of keep this power structure.
Yeah.
And by the way, it benefited us to an extent, right?
Yeah.
And so we had to own that, and that's a bit of a gut punch.
It is.
But if you don't surround yourself by other people who are going to push you to say, here's what we did, here's what we didn't do, here's what we didn't say, then you're probably not going to grow.
Yeah.
And so I would say getting those close confidants that really say, we're in this, and here's what we need to talk about.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's really important, and that is you have to understand yourself first. You have to do the work on you before you can ask other people to do the work on themselves. And so that notion of have a circle, have a network who's gonna push you, but you also have the courage to know that you've got work and you do have privilege. I mean, we all have privilege, but there's a difference between certain types of privileges versus others. And you know, we talk a lot about white privilege and how that shows up in different people. And I think simply acknowledging that it exists and there's something that you can do with both the privilege and the power that you have to actually put it to goodness is a great starting point. I'm going to shift the gears a little bit and talk about generational diversity, right? So in some cases we have 4 or 5 generations in the workplace. We have Gen Z that is up and coming. That's probably going to be a faster growing demographic than Gen Y or millennials at the moment. They're going to change the way that we're thinking about the workplace. They're going to tell that, you know, we all thought that millennials were really getting us to think differently. But Gen Z, they're these digital natives that know nothing but technology. They know nothing but, you know, Facebook and Snapchat and all these other things in terms of how they communicate. How do you think, first of all, with the younger generation, how do you think they're going to change the way that we interact? Coming, you know, they're just now entering the workplace, but how do you think they're going to change the way that we interact, and what are some of the things that they're going to challenge us with?
Yeah, well, I love that we're talking about it in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
Because every generation has different expectations, and every generation pushes other generations to say, why wasn't I asking for that, right? So if we think about millennials and a bit of critical nature about millennials wanting, you know, career advancement, and what are you going to do for me, and how are you going to prepare me for my career? But now we're seeing more late in life career folks borrowing that and saying, wait, I'm only 52 years old.
Yeah.
Are you going to upskill me? How are you going to do it? And we're seeing our more senior level employees saying, I'm okay being reskilled. I expect, you know, there was a research that we did that these older workers are expecting to be reskilled. They're expecting to be upskilled and up knowledge, and help me understand what my career looks like. We got that from the millennials. So I think when we look at Generation Z, spurring kind of the rest of the workforce to think about what we want. They are going to be technology savvy. They are coming in with a higher degree of anxiety around their career progression. So we have to be ready for that. It's the highest anxiety group of employees coming into the workforce. And what is that going to look like, and how are we going to receive that anxiety and support that? So I do think we're going to see a lot of commitment around mental health, around well-being and wellness that's going to be demanded, but not from a I demand this expectation, but from a true place of need.
Yeah.
And I again think from a generational perspective, we're going to all learn from that. That this is no longer about work-life balance that we saw in other generations. This is going to be I need to be able to function, so I'm going to need that health and healthy work style and that experience at work. So I'm looking forward to them challenging all of us to really, again, going beyond work-life integration and saying, I want to talk about my mental health.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about your mental health. I want to talk about my mental health.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to open the door for so many of us to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, talk about inclusion and belonging in a completely different way.
Yes.
The whole discussion around mental health is a super important one, because it doesn't matter what demographic you're in, you are experiencing mental health on on some front. And so let's switch this a little bit. So ageism is another one that's important to me, right? If I think about caregivers, and I think about caregivers are not just caring for their children, but they're caring for their aging parents, or I'm now getting to be that aging parent that my kids are also thinking about, how are they going to take care of me in the next kind of 10 years or so. Ageism specifically for our more mature workers who, to your point, they're wanting to stay in the work, they're working longer, right? We're healthier compared to generations prior to us. And we want to stay in the workplace and we want to remain active. And so, but there's also this notion that all the focus is on Gen Z and millennials, and they are the next emerging leaders. How do we get our more mature workers to want to stay and be relevant and make them feel like they are relevant and still a core part of our workforce?
Absolutely, and I think it goes back to that career framework that says that career framework can no longer just be a ladder up, right? It has, and we've always known this, that it has to be around the organization. So what does that career look like? What does that next stage look like for these, again, more mature workforces and more senior? How do we continue to leverage their all the skills and knowledge they have? But again, we're seeing that they're wanting and expecting to be upskilled and up knowledge. So making sure that when you have your workforce of the future plan and you're looking at upskilling your workforce, that you're really, again, cutting that demographic and that data to make sure that people who have the opportunity to be upskilled is across the whole spectrum of your identity, including age. And we are unfortunately seeing a lot of that workforce that you were talking about, that more early in career workforce having more opportunities to upskill. And we want to make sure that there's racial, we look at from a race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and age, that everyone has that opportunity to be upskilled. So when I look at diversity programs, I always like to make sure, again, that we're looking at who's getting those opportunities to upskill and up knowledge, and really focusing on that workforce in the future, being all ages.
That's fantastic. So we only have like literally
How did that happen so
about
fast?
90 minutes,
I think
a
they
minute
sped the
left.
clock up.
The one last thing I want to touch on is, how do we come together to do this work? So one of the things that I believe is that we are not coming together. We are not sharing enough around the best practices, the data that we're uncovering, the research that we're doing, the best practices that exist within our workforce. How do we come together more as a community of either companies or society to actually further this charge much more quickly than what it's being taken on today?
And I think we're seeing that. It's going away from competition to co-opetition, right? So when you look at the CEO action, and many of the companies, I think over 600 now, have signed this CEO action, signing up to commit to sharing those best and bold practices. More importantly, I think we're starting to see people sharing what's not working. And let's jump right there and say, this didn't work, it didn't have the outcome that we wanted, or it was great, people loved it, but it didn't necessarily change representation. I think getting and sharing what didn't work needs to be one of the first things, so that we can take that budget and, more importantly, that time, and put it towards the things that are working, or bold new practices that we want to figure out together.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, thank you so much,
Thanks for
Pam, for
having
this
me.
fantastic conversation. I
It
really
was
appreciate
wonderful.
it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank
Thanks.
you.